We got a piece in the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled, How Supreme Court Ruling Could Weaken Fed Independence and Shake Markets. And what we're talking about here is actually not a case that is directly related to the Fed, but rather it is focused on other agencies that currently, not agencies, but other... What's the technical term, Mark, of like what the Fed is considered? It's not an agency, but it is...
Is it quasi-governmental?
Yeah, kind of these...
It's independent for now.
But what are they called? What would we... It's the Fed's not an agency. It's a...
I would have said quasi-independent entity. I don't know, Let's just Google that.
Because, again, the distinction does matter here.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be characterized that way, but yeah. Well, go ahead. You're getting to the
So
meat of
basically,
this.
there are a few of these different entities that have multi-member boards that oversee them. Think about the NLRB, the FTC, the Federal Reserve, these types of entities. And there's a precedent that was set back in 1935. It's in a case called Humphrey's Executor, which, it sounds very much out of 1935. But the basic premise, it really does. The basic premise there is that the Supreme Court at the time barred FDR from firing members of the FTC for purely political reasons. And the reason why was they were not conventional executive branch employees in this ruling. Instead, they kind of filled this quasi-judicial role is kind of how they fit. So the Trump administration is challenging that ruling. And the reason why this is coming up is that President Trump fired a member of the NLRB and a member of what's called the Merit Systems Protection Board as well, the MSPB. And both of those people are suing, arguing that the filings are illegal by virtue of this precedent from 1935. At the moment, the Supreme Court has said, look, we're going to let the firing stand while we consider this, and briefs in the case were due yesterday. Now, why does this matter to the Fed and financial markets potentially? And the reason why is the Fed is set up similarly in terms of having, again, kind of this not conventional executive branch appointee role. It's just it's a different setup than you typically see. And this forms kind of the basis for the idea that the Fed is completely independent and operates, kind of beyond the whims of any politician who sits in the Oval Office. The reason that this matters is, let's look at, a few hypothetical situations. Let's say that the Fed is determined, or let's say it's determined that the president can fire members of the Fed at any point in time for purely political reasons. So, things that you can do, then you can appoint exactly who you want, whenever you want, basically, as long as you have control of the Senate, because Fed chairs are Senate confirmed. And pretty much what it allows you to do then is to have more direct control over monetary policy from the White House. Now, some of you listening might be like, hey, it's not a bad thing. Like, President Trump might be great at doing this. Some of you listening might be saying, hey, I don't want President Trump to be doing this. Forget about like your specific politics for just a second. And now remember them in a different way, actually. Imagine that the person who you would least like to be president has this power. For some of you, that might be Bernie Sanders. For some of you, that might be Fidel Castro. For some of you, it might be an alien from Mars. Whoever it might be. But imagine that someone that you really, really don't want to be president has the power to set monetary policy. Would you feel comfortable with that level of power vested in them to make those decisions for the country as a whole? How much power are you comfortable giving to one person if they don't share your views?
Fed hasn't always been independent, only since 1951, and even after 1951. Prior to that, they were charged me step back. Congress has the power to create money. Congress gave that power to this independent entity. It was invested in the executive. It is an Article 1 power. Google it. Very easy to read. Congress coins the money. They said, much like with regulating these specialized areas, we're going to farm this one out. With oversight, we're going to farm it out. We need expertise. So they created the Fed in 1930. There were other central banks, and various presidents vetoed or vetoed bills to recharter them, et cetera. The result was usually calamity. So after a long and painful experience, we created a Fed in 1913 after World War II and the big inflation that followed. It was brief, but it was big. The Fed broke away from the Treasury. No, we're not going to print money to buy debt. The Fed gradually became more independent over the next 30 years. It culminated in Paul Volcker, who Jimmy Carter appointed, Ronald Reagan reappointed. So bipartisan agreement that an independent, assertive Fed with the power to squash inflation was a good thing. So start with that premise. An independent Fed is a good thing. You've got to accept that. Every researcher who's ever looked at the issue globally has found inflation is higher when independence is lower, or said differently, the more political control over a central bank, which is what the Fed is.
And isn't the reason why because every politician wants lower rates?
What are you going to do? Raise rates if you're a politician? What are you, nuts? Of course, they're going to print money.
Hey, here's how would it affect my reelection chances if I raised interest rates?
No politics. And we've had recent experience with this with Richard Nixon keeping pressure on his buddy, Arthur Burns, who was also a very accomplished economist and well-known, in economic circles. So he wasn't some hack. Even he couldn't resist at first, Richard Nixon. And we had, as a result, a bigger inflation in the 70s than we probably otherwise would have. It wasn't the sole culprit. There were many, but it contributed to it. So it took us like almost 50 years to get to this point. So whatever you think, Chuck, as you said, and I think you put it perfectly, whatever you think about a particular individual's competence, imagine someone who's not competent. It's like you may think that all these expansions of executive power, I'll give you a parallel. Maybe your thing is not monetary policy. Maybe your thing is executive power. I'll say what I think somebody said at the Constitutional Convention. George Washington's sitting there. They're designing the executive. And he said, don't look at that man. He's perfect. Think of a scoundrel in that office when you're designing the executive. Right. And that's what you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about the Fed.
Imagine if you get stuck with me as president. Do you want to give me that power? I don't.
Any one of us doesn't have the perspective.
No.
Any one person, which is the value of checks and balances, feedback.
So this is something where I don't know the exact timeline. It's probably going to be, in the next month or so that we end up getting a ruling on this. But it has the potential, if the Supreme Court rules that, members of these boards are able to be fired by the president, it has the potential to shake up monetary policy in a way that we have not seen in our lifetimes,
yeah, it's
quite
unclear
honestly.
What he would do. Would he appoint himself? I don't think so.
Probably
it's a big
not.
job. Would he appoint Kevin Warsh? Is a name that's been bandied about. That's fine. He's a respected. He's not quite a researcher, but
he very well may be the next Fed chair, anyways. When Powell's term is up,
why turn the markets upside down by firing Powell and creating the uncertainty?
It's more. It's not even the specific decision around what the president may or may not do now. It's much more the can of worms that it opens about what any president could do at any point in time.
Yeah, and it's one of those issues, Chuck, that's so obscure and inaccessible. I wouldn't know a thing about it if I didn't kind of do this for a living and wasn't interested. But go ahead, what?
The average American has 400,000 other things they're thinking about before this.
No, if you ask a person on the street, what is the Fed?
And they should. They shouldn't be spending their time worrying about this.
But it is critically important. There's probably a teachable moment here. We may have to lose Fed independence to remember why we fought so hard to get it. Just like with some of these other, I don't want to verge into the political, but sometimes you got to lose rights to appreciate them and fight to get them back. That may be where we end up with the Fed. I hope we don't have to learn that lesson again.